Cool, let's do it. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Good morning if you're on the West Coast or somewhere in between. Thanks for being here for today's webinar, 8 Foundations for a Successful Major Campaign. And my name is Stephen Shattuck, and as always, I'll be moderating today's discussion. Thanks for being here. Before we begin, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. Just want to let everyone know that we are recording this presentation, and I'll be sending out a link to the recording as well as the slides later on this afternoon. So look for an email from me in just a couple hours after the presentation concludes. And as you're listening today, please feel free to send in any questions or comments through the chat box right there on your screen. I'll see those. Jeff will see those throughout the presentation, and we're going to save some time at the end for a more formal Q&A. So don't be shy about that. We love to get some conversation going in the chat room. We would love to see people participate in that way. It always makes me smile to see people talking to each other and asking questions of our guests. And just in case this is your first Bloomerang webinar, welcome. Thanks for being here. This webinar, some of you who attend our webinars know that we took February off. This is kind of the kickoff to our new season of Thursday webinars. We do these every week, usually on Thursdays. They're totally free. They're totally educational. We would love for you to register for more of these sessions. We try to bring on an expert speaker every week to give a highly educational presentation, just like Jeff is going to do today. But in addition to that, Bloomerang is also a provider of database software for nonprofits. So if you're in the market for that, if you're interested in learning more, please check out our website after the presentation. You can get a look inside the software. You can look at a video demo. You can look at some customer testimonials, and we'd love for you to learn more if that interests you. So I want to go ahead and introduce today's guest. He is Jeff Jowdy. Hey there, Jeff. How's it going?
Doing great, Stephen. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for being here. Jeff is he's one of my favorite guys. He's a Southern gentleman. He's one of the nicest guys I know. Jeff, he joined us for a webinar back in 2013. We just had to have him back. And for those of you who don't know Jeff, he is the founder and president of Lighthouse Counsel, which is a consulting firm that serves nonprofit clients in board development, fundraising, strategic planning, and communications. They have offices in Athens, Georgia, and Franklin, Tennessee. And Jeff himself has more than 25 years of experience, actually, in nonprofit leadership. Prior to joining the development field, he was a human resources executive for a major medical center. He's a graduate of the University of Georgia's Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication, where he studied speech communication on the graduate level at that same university. And he received a master's degree in human resource management from Troy University. He's involved with tons of nonprofits. He's a frequent writer. He's a frequent speaker. It's going to be a real treat for you all to hear this presentation. I'm just really excited to hand things off to him. So I'm going to do that now. I've said too much already. Jeff, why don't you take it away for us, my friend?
Great. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, everyone, for being with us today. We certainly appreciate, I'm sitting here trying to learn the clicking, Stephen, but I've got it now. So we're going to talk today about the 8 foundations for a successful major campaign. And when I wrote this title, and it's actually something we've given a few times in person, I started worrying that some of our listeners, we're going to know 8 foundations that we can send grant requests to. So we're talking really about the foundations, not foundations in terms of philanthropic foundations, but what things really need to be in place before you look at a major campaign. And that major campaign could be a capital campaign, it could be an endowment campaign, or it could be a comprehensive campaign, as so many institutions today are looking at, where you incorporate annual, endowment, capital, or any combination thereof. And I love this quote from Tommy Lasorda, and this thing, it speaks to what we're going to be discussing today, and that is that pennants are won and lost during spring training. And this has a special meaning to me because actually one of our clients had Tommy Lasorda as an ambassador, so he's certainly someone who is very philanthropic minded. But what great wisdom that he has, because the foundation for success in the major campaign really is what happens before. And we're not talking about the feasibility study and other preparation. We're talking about these 8 foundations that really take, in many cases, years and years to prepare. So it's what happens before a campaign that determines success. So one of my favorite quotes from Ben Franklin, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And it really is. When you have these 8 foundations in place before you embark on a major campaign, your roadmap to the campaign is then accelerated, and your chances of success, opportunities for success, are certainly increased by far. So today, our conversation, 8 foundations for success in a major campaign. You can see it here. Number 1, strong staff and board leadership. 2, an effective strategic plan. 3, programs, the institution. So whatever those things that your great mission is fulfilled through those programs. Financial strength, 4. Annual fundraising success, 5. Appropriate technology and systems, and how appropriate that we're here today with Bloomerang, 6. 7, a strong case for support. 8, an effective prospective donor engagement. So we're going to talk about these briefly. It was fun via Twitter. I think Stephen and I engaged in conversation with someone who said, gosh, you're going to cover all that in one webinar, because each of these 8 points, each of these 8 foundations, really can and easily be a whole presentation on their own. So we're going to have a high-level overview of each, and hopefully plenty of time for questions and answers. And then afterwards, I'd be happy to have dialogue with you by email if you have additional questions. So number 1, a strong staff and board leadership. And you can see the quote there from J.R. Tolkien: "Shortcuts make long delays." And we're in a business and a profession, a great profession, where there's so many demands on our time as fundraisers and nonprofit professionals, and so often we are tempted to take shortcuts. And what I found is that 9.5 out of 10 times that shortcut results in a delay. And one of those foundations, of course, that we're talking about, again, strong staff and board leadership committed to a culture of philanthropy. And that means time and resources. So it means the CEO of our organization, our colleagues at the senior level of the organization, and in particular the board, have to be committed to a culture of philanthropy. We could have, as long as we're on the path to that culture of philanthropy, we're in good shape, because it's something that's certainly built and reinforced over time. One key is the expectations of board involvement and board giving, and obviously 100% board giving, hopefully at a leadership level for the institution, and board involvement in the fundraising process. And of course, different board members have different levels of expertise and comfort in that process, and different organizations have different culture. But at some level, the board needs to be involved in this whole process, and we'll talk more about donor engagement. They have to be involved in cultivation, identification, and hopefully soliciting, and for sure giving. And then we come back to the shortcuts, make long delays. The CEO and senior staff have to embrace best practices, and that is so essential, that the CEO and the organization really understand those core basic fundraising principles, and so they don't go down the road and take shortcuts that then deter your success, our success as fundraising professionals. So strong staff and board leadership, and again, specifically where it's committed to a culture of philanthropy. Then we have an effective strategic plan, and this is really magic for several reasons, because if you draw back the history of most successful campaigns, they begin with a strategic plan. And It's a great Dilbert here, and you can see it where, it's pretending that it's useful, because so many times, organizations may embark on a planning process, and they're really not committed to it. Well, most of these 8 foundations I've learned, through experience over, 25, 30 years, and some of them the hard way. And to do a planning process is so important, and especially to conduct what we'd say is an effective planning process. Plan is important, and how it's created is important, and you want to use the plan to gain confidence, to have the organization on the same page, and then to actually implement it. So an effective strategic plan drives the fundraising initiatives. One of the things that a lot of our friends and colleagues in independent schools and higher education joke about is, presidentitis, and that's the desire of a new president to build, build, build. And it happens often, and the pendulum swings, and the next president kind of fills in some other needs. But really, an effective plan, it's not the CEO, it is the CEO's vision, but they're part of an overall process. It's really involving the board, it's strategic, it's well thought out of, it's responsive but not reactive. In other words, it's going to respond to situations but not jump and without thought. So it drives the fundraising initiative. A great planning process involves key constituents. What a great opportunity for engagement and involvement. One of the favorite quotes that is that if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. But at a level, but much like a feasibility study, in a broader sense, an effective planning process is great cultivation, and you have the opportunity to involve your key constituents and donors among them, stakeholders, other constituencies, but to get their insight. And through that, it's an incredible cultivation opportunity. We believe that planning is a process, not an event. Very important. You put people in a room for a day-long retreat. If you do me, after 2 hours, I'm ready to get out of there. And planning does not occur in a vacuum. So a good planning process, from our experience and our perspective, takes time. It doesn't have to take a year or two, because if you have a 5-year plan, you spend half that time planning, and some organizations do. We have one organization I'm aware of that's actually been in a planning process now for about 3.5 years for a 5-year plan. They just can't pull the trigger. But it is a process, and ideas develop and gel, and new insight comes about when you have time, but you got to drive the process. Then the plan has to be communicated. Very important at the end of the day. And one of the huge things, failing to execute the plan makes it a wasted effort, and really frustrates constituencies and leaders that have been involved in the process. But an effective planning process, to our point today, it builds confidence in the institution, it aligns resources, and from that, you can then see where your eventual campaign may be headed. Next, we have successful programs in the institution, and that is, your organization needs to have a track record of programs that make a difference, make a life-changing difference. And certainly you can include new programs and new initiatives in a campaign, and donors respond and want to make those happen and provide seed money. But you have to have credibility that donors know that you're going to deliver and do what you say you're going to do. So successful programs, vibrant programs that support your mission, that align with your mission, existing level of excellence, so you're known for excellence in areas. You have measurable outcomes with track record of success. And again, we're a brief overview today, but we'll cover this more on donor engagement and communication, but the ability to tell those stories of how lives are changed and communities are made better. And so a good track record of success in programs gives people confidence to invest and gives you programs to include in your campaign. Next, we have financial success, and one of the lessons I learned early in my career. I was at a school that was lack of resources, and the leadership there thought we've got a great mission, but certainly we're needy and people are going to respond. Well, that's not typical. People don't give to a sinking ship. They don't want to put good money after bad. And if financial strength and sound management aren't in place, that more often than not, donors and leaders will flee, and increasingly so. And so if these practices aren't in place, that they need to be. And by being good stewards, of course, this would include financial strength of budgeting for reserves, building endowment, and having other safety nets in place. And we'll talk about case development in a minute. But financial support, financial strength, rather, the abilities to sustain the programs that you're worthy of support and that you have sound management. And that financial strength then gives people confidence to invest in you at a larger level in a major campaign. Now, annual fundraising success also is very important. It really allows you to benchmark your success every year, every month, every week. How are we doing? How are we tracking? And really, every year, you're asking your donors to vote with their purse. So a fundraising program, an annual fund, is vital to your organization for the funds. It's vital also for the feedback that you receive from your donors, from your volunteers. How are we doing? How can we be better? And also, you are given the success to really develop your staff and volunteers. Kind of the baseball analogy would be preparing them for the big game, maybe. And again, the annual fundraising success is the foundation. It's a predictor of future success, and it's critical in identifying major prospects. And they have appropriate technology and systems. And certainly, I love this quote. I used to have a poster much like this in my office. Attention to detail improves the net. And really, this speaks to the ability to give donors a good giving experience. It speaks to tracking and processing gifts. It speaks to allowing donors flexibility. One of the things, if you're going to ask me for a gift and I could pay it off monthly or over a number of years or even change payments along the way, I'm more likely to invest. If you make it difficult on me and I've got to remember to go online and make a gift, then you're going to get a lot smaller gift. And it also appropriate systems and technology. We're talking about really the donor engagement and the stewardship and knowing birthdays, knowing family members, having the correct spelling of names, all those details, and having the systems in place to support them. Because if you can't appropriately support annual fundraising and ongoing fundraising, then when you have a major campaign and the number of gifts and commitments increases exponentially, and the size and scope of them do, and the details, then it makes it more challenging. And having the appropriate technology and systems, and again, highly recommend Bloomerang. We recommend them to our clients. So if you're looking for the right software, then we'd encourage you to take a look at our friends at Bloomerang. But you want to have the right software for your institution today and for the next 5 years. So often we see people get software that is just overwhelming and not intuitive and user-friendly, and Bloomerang certainly is all those things, user-friendly and intuitive. Be sure you're trained and cross-trained. You may be at a major university where you have 4 or 5 people in a department, but you might be at a smaller shop where you have one person or half of one person. What happens when he or she leaves or gets sick or has a occasion where they're gone for some time? So be sure you have training and cross-training. Sure that you have regular reports that on a weekly, monthly, even daily basis that are produced, so you know how gifts are coming in, how you're tracking toward your goals, so you can benchmark your progress. And of course, updating your records regularly, and then having your systems for gift processing and being sure that the checks are cleared and things happen in a prompt manner and appropriate manner, so that again you're giving the donor a good giving experience, you're helping them, and you're giving them confidence and faith in further with appropriate technologies and systems. And then next, and we got, by the way, a lot of good questions, and we're going to be able to, we're going to have plenty of time to address those in just a few minutes, so appreciate those and keep them coming. I want to go ahead and finish our presentation and then have some great conversation and address the questions, and appreciate your sharing those and keep them coming. Next is a strong case for support, and this goes back to several of the points that we just covered, the financial strength, the effective plan, etc. One of my favorite quotes from a great fundraiser, a great philanthropist, John Rockefeller, and it resonates so strong. Never think you need to apologize for asking someone to give to a worthy objective any more than as though you are giving him or her an opportunity to participate in a high-grade investment. So if you use that analogy and you think about asking someone to invest in your organization, and some of the topics that we've covered, these 8 foundations already, you wouldn't make an investment in a company. You wouldn't buy stock in a company or be a partner in a company with poor leadership, or with a board that wasn't committed to best practices, or that didn't have sound finances or a plan for growth and a plan for future. So John Rockefeller really speaks to some of the cores of what we are discussing today. And that strong case for support, and this is something that we say a case for support is the rationale behind your campaign, and it evolves over time. It evolves as you prepare for a campaign. Your organization should have an overall, case for support for different funding options. And when you go into a campaign, you begin to hone a case for support for that campaign. And when you get involved in the pre-planning and the feasibility study, the case for support changes. And then this broad case for support then gets refined and developed into what we call a campaign case statement, and then other campaign materials for the objectives that you have at hand. And an effective case reflects compelling and well-defined objectives that have been developed out of the planning process with leadership and some of the things that we've discussed. So a strong overall case for support, rationale for giving, honed into a case statement eventually for your campaign. Then we have prospective donor engagement. And this is a big foundation area, a very important one. It ties in to some of the things we've discussed, especially the strong annual campaign. But how are we engaging with our key constituents and our donors and our best donors? And there's the Iacocca. You can have brilliant ideas, but if you can't get them across, your ideas won't get you anywhere. And so often we're guilty of that. We've got a great mission, and we're just not able to articulate it where folks understand how worthy we are of their investment, their involvement, and their support. So with prospective donor engagement, we're talking about really comprehensive donor identification, cultivation, and stewardship. Then a piece of that, the Iacocca quote, will be effective communications. And that's broad-based awareness for our organization and philanthropy, followed by strategic communications efforts, and we say more personal. So as you have broader efforts for annual giving, new donors, but obviously that strategy and those tactics change, become more personal, more timely, more responsive as you talk about donors at higher levels. It's vital that on a regular basis, your best friends and your future best friends are, hearing from you regularly, and then that they be multi-channel, and that's especially important in today's world. That I think the average age on Facebook keeps increasing. Some of our college student friends are fleeing from it because their parents and grandparents, even great-grandparents, are on there. But we're all, in today's world, getting information from more and more channels, and we have to know where we need to be, where our donors are, and where the donors of tomorrow will be. So that engagement, effective communications, is a very, very important piece. And then a huge piece is just prospective donor engagement. Fundraising, of course, is an art and a science. It's an art because it's all about relationships and knowing those nuances and knowing your donor, and every donor is different. And we often laugh, but it's true that donors are even different at different months or years, and so it's definitely an art, but it's a science because there are best practices and because it's really built on numbers. If we're going to be successful in a campaign, in a major campaign, and laying the foundation, we know that we're going to have a certain level of prospective donors, and we say really qualified prospective donors, which would be cultivated and people who are engaged if we're in a campaign. So we have the opportunity to qualify people through this engagement before a campaign. But we know we need a robust prospective donor pool, and that's the all-important pipeline of current and future major donors to meet those campaign goals. We need a growing number of donors, repeat donors, donors at higher levels. We need to be building further engagement through volunteer opportunities. We know intuitively, an independent sector did a study years back, and it validated that people give significantly more to where they're involved. If each of us were to take a minute now and think about where our top 2 or 3 gifts go, I would imagine that 75-80% of those organizations are things that we're involved with or our families are personally. So we want to get volunteer opportunities, part of this engagement process, to get involved, to get their expertise. Part of we have the past donors, repeat donors we've talked about, but also we want to use, as we look to building a robust prospective donor pool, to use volunteers in that process. They often know who amongst their friends have an interest in different mission areas, who might have wealth personally or family wealth, whether it be parents or grandparents, and of course their wealth screening services. But to all these mechanisms, have a robust prospective donor pool that then can support a major campaign. And then a key piece of the prospective donor engagement is it's a continual cycle, and you're continuing relationships, and always on the lookout for new relationships and ones with greater potential and to focus on. You don't stop. You're always in this process. We were involved with a client feasibility study back in the fall, and I'll never forget meeting with this organization's by far ever top donor. And in our conversation, I asked him when the institution's president had visited with him last. It was 18 months. And I paused, and he smiled, and then he shared. And he said, when I asked the president about plans for the future, he had endowed a program at a huge level. He said the president couldn't answer the question. So this is that continuity, and 18-month lap with your best donor is not a good thing. So on an ongoing basis, we're identifying who new donors might be, who donors with greater capacity might be, and we're just doing things continually to get them more and more involved. And as Jerry Panish shares, to give that big old hug and embrace them further in our organization. But it's always a process. It's ongoing and continues. And then, love this quote by one of the classics of fundraising, author Cy Seymour, Designs in Fundraising, and if you can get it, the language is a bit dated. It's out of print, I believe, but it's a great classic. So if you can find it on Amazon or eBay or wherever, have it. It's a great book. But love this. If you want to raise alfalfa, you can get several crops a year. So if you want to raise oats, it will take a little longer. And this is what we're talking about is 8 foundations for success in major campaigns. If these things are in place, you're really building a program that will outlast you and will benefit those you serve for decades to come. With these 8 foundations, really speak to organizational readiness and capacity, then you will find your actual campaign experience so much more successful, so much more pleasant with these 8 foundations in place. Stephen, I'd love to take some of these questions and that we've had come in through the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Jeff. We've had some people ask questions already, and I'll kind of go through those. But if you've been listening along and maybe you were sitting on your hands, please feel free to answer some or to ask some questions. Probably got about 15 or so minutes that we can spend in this formal Q&A setting. So, Jeff, I'm just going to kind of pull them out from the top. Ginny here was wondering, have you ever seen an all-volunteer nonprofit run a successful fundraising campaign? Have you ever worked with an organization or seen one that did all the things you talked about but was all volunteer run? What advice would you have for her there?
Well, in the campaign, yes. We have all volunteer and no staff at all. I'll say no. We've worked with organizations with no fundraising staff and seen them. But if you scale this down, it's certainly more challenging, by having all volunteers. We have other commitments, and at the end of the day, we're volunteers. But one of the whole processes or thoughts behind the 8 foundations, really how we approach a campaign, is to divide things up, put them in smaller pieces, do it in segments, be strategic. One thing builds on another. So I think with that approach, you can be successful. We've never. The question was, have we been involved personally? No. Could you? Yes, you certainly could. It would just take huge commitment on the volunteer parts, and that's, I guess, the challenge and downfall, as we all know from working with volunteers. And you can see that rule of thirds is often talked about. You got a third that are really committed. You got a third you can notice, and you got a third that are just there. And right. So it would really rely on that top third and what can they make happen. But
definitely possible, though. Well, we've got a question here from Mercedes. Mercedes is wondering, what are some recommendations for leading the board in living a culture of philanthropy? What advice would you have for her in getting the board on board with your 8 principles, with the advice in general? Obviously, the board's involvement is going to be super powerful. What advice would you have for her in getting the board involved with all of this?
It's a process, number one, if they're not there, and it takes time, and it's a process of ongoing education, encouragement, reinforcement, and even making some tough decisions. But one thing I'd share is that if you want to really change a culture of a board and move things along, you got to make it personal too. So you can't rely, if you're building a culture of philanthropy. One of the question that I mentioned earlier that we asked the major donor in the feasibility study, when the last time you saw a president, we'll ask the same question of CEOs outside the board meeting or chief development officer. Outside the board meeting, when's the last time you saw the board member? And if you're relying on even a monthly, but typically a quarterly board meeting to build a relationship with the board, it doesn't work.
Right.
It takes time and being face-to-face and having conversation and being able to bring things up and bring them along. So I would say that's real important, is to reach out to your board members on an ongoing basis it's very, very important that as the development staff that you have a role in selecting the board and being a part of that process. And if you're the chief development officer, you should be at the table, and that you're picking board members with that in mind, so that going forward, you're pre-qualifying people who have an inclination and understanding. And then it's ongoing coaching on a regular basis and education, and not to be into the weeds of fundraising, but it's much like the planning process. Do you have a development plan, and does the board know what those key directions are, so that when the board member has a great idea for a new special event or something, that they know that that's not a part of the plan, that
Right.
there's an overall strategic direction for the organization and in fundraising.
Makes sense. We've got a question here from Karen. I like it because it's about databases, and I'm kind of the database guy. But Karen here is wondering, what sort of detail should we be putting into our database to prepare a capital campaign, specifically looking for info that may be more relevant for large campaigns versus just what they do in a regular annual campaign. What about the database side, Jeff? What should people be thinking about in terms of maybe their contact information or the constituent information in their database?
Yeah, and Stephen, this may be something that I'll pass off to you. So I want you, after I muddle through it, please, I'm counting on you to save me. But just a couple of quick thoughts, and one would be that you need to be sure that you have the information you need on major prospects, and so however you code those, and if you've done wealth screening or whatever, or past giving, then before you look at the campaign, you got to reach out and do the research. If you don't know where Jeff went to school and does he like pets and when his birthday is, then that takes a lot of research, and you can do that in a number of ways. And of course, the best way is being in someone's home or their office and observing and getting back and putting things into Bloomerang. And the other is so that having that information, and then two would be how you can code and segment and pull reports, pull different constituencies and how they're identified, so you can target communications to them. That'd be two, but Stephen, you help me out here, please.
Yeah, you read my mind on those things. The prospect research for sure, the segmenting so that you're making appropriate asks through appropriate channels. And the one thing I would add to what Jeff said is just kind of at a basic level, making sure that you have up-to-date contact information. If you're going to do a capital campaign, it's probably more than likely that you're going to do maybe a direct mail campaign or some sort of direct marketing. And one thing you can do that's pretty painless is something that's called an NCOA, which stands for National Change of Address, and that's the United States Postal Service database that you can compare to your database to make sure that your contact information is up to date, and specifically for mailing addresses. And that's something that that's not very expensive typically. I think about 14 or maybe it's 17% of Americans move every year. So that's a lot of lost dollars that you're going to spend on direct mail that never reaches its intended destination. So an NCOA is something that I would do a few months before any capital campaign or any major campaign, honestly. But I do think Jeff really nailed it with the prospect research and the segmenting side. And if you've been doing a good job maintaining your database, you should be in good shape as long as you've got if you got your policies and procedures and your data entry is good and people are using it correctly, you should be fine. But those additional things will really just be more insights as you go along. That was pretty good. We tag teamed that one, Jeff.
Great, thank you, Steve.
Yeah, there's a couple more here. I'm just going to go down through the list. We probably got maybe 10 more minutes or so. Amy here is wondering, what are the advantages, if any, to creating webinars and podcasts for campaigns? So she's kind of asking about maybe those digital communication tools. Do you have any experience with that, Jeff? Have you seen anything that you thought was particularly good in terms of a digital piece of content for a campaign?
Yeah, I think any chance you have for people to be engaged But with that in mind, if you're in a major campaign, and remember that the major gifts are going to need to be face-to-face. That not many people are going to make a six-figure gift, remotely.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to get to them. And then, as the campaign goes public and goes broadens, then it may not be, a webinar on the campaign. Now, that'd be a great tool for training volunteers, frankly, because if you have a national campaign, national organization, that would be excellent, great idea. And you may have, some, if you look at a campaign and you look at some of these 8 foundations, then maybe in the planning process, you do a webinar and maybe a virtual town hall meeting with constituencies to give feedback and ask questions. And it may be the same thing on different, topics that relate to the campaign. It may not be the campaign specifically, but it could be. I think I haven't seen anything like that for a campaign, but I wouldn't rule it out. I think it'd be worth trying.
Absolutely. Here's from Bonnie. I say fun because maybe I'm a little bit of a downer, but she's wondering what are the best practices for house cleaning an inactive board who are simply historical friends of the organization, or maybe they've been on the board for a long time. I know a lot of people say you should fire bad board members. What advice would you have for Bonnie, who's got an inactive board who isn't really helping a lot, but maybe there are some political reasons why they're on the board that are sensitive? What advice would you have for Bonnie there?
Sure, and I've been through that many times. It's never easy. And at the end of the day, when you have to make a tough call, and I'm going to back this up, but at the end of the day, if you have to make a tough call, if you got a bad board chair or a bad board member, you need to treat them, with respect and do all the things that you need to do. But at the end of the day, if you got to make a change, not doing it makes it worse. But how do you do that? It can take time. You can do it in a number of ways. You almost always need to have, of course, your CEO committed. So she or he has had that board and it hadn't worked. So, if you're a new CEO, then that's a whole different circumstance. But the CEO and the Chief Development Officer need to be on the same page. And it always helps to have a champion. So when you're thinking about who your next chair is, then you want to get someone who understands where the board should be. Then a lot of times you just give the board the opportunity to change and step up. One of the funniest things, and it always happens when you and we're not talking about it today, but one of the things that we're convinced is a best practice that we don't vary from is to do a campaign feasibility study before a major campaign. And when you get in that process, I don't think I've ever seen a board not lose 2 or 3 members because they know a big campaign's coming.
Yep.
And, those are usually 2 or 3 members that needed to go anyway. But, increasing gift expectations, and I know there are varying philosophies among my friends and colleagues in the nonprofit, that we're firm and believe that a board member should make a leadership gift, whatever that is for your organization, and changing that expectation usually helps with people either stepping up or rolling off, providing them with other opportunities for involvement. And you have to be careful because you don't want to make a bad board member and maybe a negative board member, then make them a emeritus board member where they can come every meeting forever. Should be negative, be bad. But moving them to an advisory board, moving them to a program board, and really getting in front of people and back to the relationships. Being sure that you understand who they are, that you've tried to connect with them, that you've tried to move them along in that personal manner, and this would be and helping them feeling important. We all want to be appreciated. So what can we do to earn that board member? We had a board member at a foundation I used to staff that I took it over, and we had someone in our office that wrote the minutes, and this board member would tear them apart. And he wouldn't do it beforehand. He would wait. The staff member would present the minutes, or the volunteer who's the secretary, and the board member would stand up and rip them apart in the most condescending manner. And so I was like, what am I going to do with this guy? And I went to see him and asked for his advice. And I said, would you mind reviewing these before we sent them out? And he said, no, I'll be glad to. So we sent the minutes to him ahead of time. He tore them apart but didn't change the meaning. He wrote them how he wanted them written. And with great fanfare at every board meeting, we began to laugh and say, well, these minutes have been pre-approved by ex-board member. Everybody laughed. Everybody approved them. And he became a pleasure to deal with, and his giving increased because he got to write the minutes for us. So all that to say, get to know your board members there, and be sure that you've made every effort in a personal way to change them. And if they're not moving, you need to get rid of them.
Yep. Here's one from Danny, which I think is short for Danielle. Danielle, and I think she comes from a higher education background, so if that gives a little context to the question. Danny's wondering, when it comes to planned giving as part of a campaign, what do you recommend in approaching donors for this? My organization has decided to use it as a sweep up after major gifts have been solicited. We are looking at setting up an educational workshop on planned giving. Do you think that is an effective approach?
Yeah, we like planned giving to be considered as a part of the menu for every campaign. And what we typically recommend is it's a part of the initial discussion, frankly, because if you're out visiting with your top prospective donors, we all want to know what's expected of us, right? And to be able to, and in a major campaign and one that might have a period of 5 years for commitment to be fulfilled, personally, I'd want to know up front, what all do you want from me? What is it I should consider? So we would recommend, if you could, to include that in every ask, as appropriate. There are exceptions, obviously. Someone can be new to your organization and have high net worth, make a significant gift, but they don't have the track record where they're going to consider you for a planned gift. So you use discernment. Certainly should be a part, or considered as a part of every campaign, as long as the organization is old enough. If it's a 5 or 10 year old organization, it may not even have an endowment. It doesn't have that longevity, so that might be the exception. And then, but if you haven't addressed it, to Danielle's question, if you haven't addressed it earlier visits, then absolutely. But I would work to have goals for planned gifts in every campaign, and it'd be goals for the number of planned gifts, the number of new members of your planned giving society, heritage society, also the dollar value based on past history. So
that makes sense.
Absolutely, and if you haven't made that a part of the visits to date, then I think at that final stage and wrap up, I think is what she said, that definitely would be out visiting with people, and I would it gives them another chance to be part of the campaign, to be recognized, and I would, if you haven't already, built in those goals and numbers, so as you make those visits and you close out the campaign, it puts pressure on them time-wise to respond.
Yeah, that makes sense. Doug here is wondering, would you do anything different for an endowment campaign? Is there anything about an endowment campaign that maybe you would alter in terms of the advice you've given? What about an endowment campaign there? Doug's asking about that.
In terms of the foundations, the only difference, we just consulted on an endowment campaign that frankly had no annual fundraising success. We did a successful endowment campaign for an association that had a foundation, but it had been self-funded, and there was no donor history, really. They had one donor in their history. And so that would be an example probably but they had incredible staff and board leadership, the planning process, great programs. They were, sound financially. They had the system, they had the case. They did not have the prospective donor engagement. But we created that with year before they started asking for gifts, they got out and made a lot of visits. And so that was accomplished in a short period of time with great focus and vigor. And then so the prospective donor engagement happened, and they did a feasibility study, but they still had no track record of annual giving. And I would think that would be, based on our experience, the one of the 8 that you wouldn't have to have for an endowment campaign.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Here's one from Paige, and I think we're going to do about 2 more because I don't want to keep people too late after 2 p.m. Eastern. Paige here is saying that she's in the midst of planning a campaign that is seeking donations from local small businesses. I want our resource development committee, which is comprised of about 8 volunteers from businesses, to be more engaged in that endeavor. So she wants those 8 volunteers to be helping with that. But their time is limited. Do you have any tips for greater engagement, ownership, and follow-through for volunteers, which is who Paige is working with? Any advice there for Paige?
Absolutely. And this is the school of hard knocks.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, what we like to do is narrow, and this is almost counterintuitive to a lot of people, narrow what we ask of anybody. There's a real
Mm-hmm.
estate phrase that a property's worth is the highest and best value or purpose, whatever. And so when we look at a staff member or a volunteer, what is the thing that she or he can do best and no one else can? What are those
Yep.
1 or 2 things? And the same thing for volunteers. And if I'm in a campaign and you try and give me 10 names, and so often campaigns still run this way, we're going to give away 10 names, and they're going to make these calls, and you're going to have these cards, and blah, blah, I'm going to shut down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do it. As you mentioned, I serve on several boards, and each of those boards I'm engaged in help, reaching out and cultivating and soliciting, as appropriate, but it's people I know. So I think that's part of it too, is that I narrow what I ask and be sure they feel comfortable doing it, and be sure that they're trained and coached. I met with a great friend yesterday who's he's a higher ed advancement professional. He's running a campaign and was, commiserating about his campaign committee, and some of them weren't moving along. And I said, well, the people that aren't moving along, have you gone on visits with them? No. So, well, pick the best prospects, go on a visit with them, build their confidence. And so it's just narrow that scope and be sure that people are set up for success.
Good. Well, I've been saving this question for last because I think it's appropriate. Valerie is wondering, how do you keep your campaign members committed without getting so frustrated that you just find it better to do everything yourself and get burned out? So I assume Valerie is that person trying to avoid burnout, which we can all understand. What advice did you have for that? I think that's a really good question.
It is a good question. Well, one thing, and I'm gathering, Valerie, you've already got your committee,
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that we do in a major campaign is we put a price tag on being on the committee. So, for example, the endowment campaign that we mentioned for an association, they ended up raising almost $11 million. They had a committee of 26 on their steering committee. By design, 1 or 2 of those people only made a gift, and it was 6-figure or more, and they're on the committee, and they got recognized, and we knew that going in. Probably another third of them, back to our earlier conversation, only made 1 or 2 visits, but they were huge visits.
Right.
And then you had people who really, back to that rule of the thirds, we had 5 co-chairs of this campaign, and those 5 co-chairs were the ones that made 4, 5, and 10 visits. So I think part of it again is how you structure it, and but the other thing would be back to we just mentioned, for Valerie, would be you've got to be face to face with them. They've got demands like you do, and you're getting burned out, and they're getting frustrated with me. And if you're on, they're involved in more than one thing. So we all have other demands. We got professional, family, personal, other things we do, volunteer things. Oftentimes in a campaign, your committee members are on other organizations, other boards. So part of it is you got to create a relationship where when Valerie calls, they return your call. And they don't, when Jeff and Stephen calls, the note sits there. When Valerie calls, they call her right back. So you got to have that, and it's true. You got to have that relationship. It's not easy. And then again, I would narrow the scope. If they're sitting there with a bunch of things, then hone it to one thing. If they do that well, give them one more thing. But don't let them get overwhelmed. Coach them. Be there. If it's a local organization or what the structure is, but if you can get in front of them, get in front of them. Let them know they're appreciated. Communicate regularly in terms of where things are, what they should be doing next. If I'm in a campaign, I'm sending emails out every week to the committee on what their next steps are. I'm sending them every week their list of what they should be doing, of who they should be calling on, and personal. So Valerie, I hope that helps. That's a key. That's a good question, and it's such a key part of a campaign. And the other is, and I'll just close with this, Steve, is design a campaign that doesn't go on forever. And again, I've mentioned this before, but we're sticklers for a feasibility study. If you do the study, do the right research, you got the 8 foundations in place, then when it comes time to the campaign planning, you should be able to know how long the campaign should take. And even if it's a university campaign that may last several years, but so many campaigns can be accomplished in a year and should be.
Yep.
I mean, if it's a church campaign or other internal organization, 4 to 6 months. And so again, and this is not helping Valerie where she is, but when you're looking ahead and you're strategic and you accomplish things before a campaign that some people do during a campaign, then your campaign is 6 months, not 2 years, and people feel better about it.
Makes sense. Valerie, don't get burned out. We don't want you to get burned out. We care about you. That would make us sad.
Absolutely. We've all been.
Well, Jeff, I feel like we could talk about this for hours, and I know we actually have talked about this for hours. But we got to leave it there, especially if people haven't eaten lunch yet. Don't want to keep people too long. But this was a lot of fun. I always like when the Q&A, people are asking questions, people are talking to each other. So thank you all for asking questions and talking with each other. It's always fun to see that. I know we didn't get to all the questions because we're about out of time. We got about 2 minutes left. But Jeff, safe to say you'd be willing to take questions via email, via Twitter. You're kind of a big Twitter guy.
Find me on Twitter. I'd love to follow you. And if not on Twitter, email me, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Yes, please do that. And check out Lighthouse Council. Check out Jeff's blog. He writes a great blog called Bedrock and Beacons. If you search for that, I think it's a weekly blog. Isn't that right, Jeff, that you write for?
And that's on fundraisingsuccess.com. So that you won't find my weekly blog on Lighthouse, but we do have great blogs and podcasts at lighthousecouncil.com. But I'd love, and thank you, Stephen. Weekly blog at fundraisingsuccess.com. And it's Bedrock.
Yeah, check that out.
Thank you.
Great content. And we'd love for you to check out our website as well. We've got a daily blog post on the Bloomerang site. Again, we do these webinars every week. Starting the second week of March, we're going to have an educational webinar every week through July. We've got them scheduled out already. So check out our webinar page. You may find a topic or a guest there that looks interesting to you. We would love to see you again. So we'll leave it at that. Look for an email from me a little later on this afternoon. I'll be sending out the recording and the slides. And we'd love to see you again, hopefully on another webinar. So have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend if we don't talk to you, and we will see you next time. Bye now.